Hello everyone. I am a storyteller, and I am here to offer my support today. I understand that you are likely using this video to help you drift off to sleep. Before we begin, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would also be interested to know where you are located and what time it is for you. Now, please get comfortable and take a moment to relax. Ilion, New York, was a quiet town with a history that stretched back centuries. Nestled in the Mohawk Valley, it had seen generations come and go. But there was one thing that never left, a fog that rolled in every autumn, whispering through the streets. No one knew where the whispers came from. Some said it was the wind slipping through the old, abandoned textile mills. Others believed it was something far older, something that had been waiting in the mist for centuries. On October 13th, a group of college students decided to test the town's old legend. Jason, Emily, and their friend Mark brought cameras and audio recorders, hoping to catch something eerie for their online channel. They walked deep into the fog-covered streets, their footsteps muffled by the dense mist. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily whispered. Jason chuckled. "Come on, it's just a story." Then they heard it. A voice. Soft, almost pleading. "Help me." Mark turned, his flashlight cutting through the mist. But there was nothing there. The voice had come from an alley beside the abandoned mill. Against Emily's protests, Jason stepped forward, his camera rolling. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Then, a figure emerged from the fog. A girl, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, barefoot, her eyes hollow. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed at them. "Leave," she whispered. Jason took a step back, suddenly feeling ice-cold. The camera screen flickered, static buzzing in his ears. Then Mark screamed. Emily turned to see Mark being pulled into the mist. His body twisted as if unseen hands were gripping him. Jason lunged forward, but Mark vanished, swallowed by the fog. His screams echoed through the streets, then silence. The police found no trace of Mark. The footage was corrupted, the audio a mess of static and whispers. Jason and Emily never spoke of that night again. But every October, the fog returned, and the whispers grew louder. Locals say if you listen closely, you can still hear Mark calling from the mist, forever trapped in the whispers of Ilion. Jason and Emily left Ilion the following week. The town felt different after that night, quieter, heavier, as if something unseen was watching. The police had no leads on Mark's disappearance, labeling it a tragic accident. But Jason knew better. A month later, Jason decided to check the corrupted footage one last time. He hooked the camera to his laptop and ran software to restore the files. The video flickered, then played. At first, it was just static. Then, the mist appeared on screen. A shadow moved within it. Mark's voice echoed faintly. "Help me." Jason's stomach turned. He scrubbed through the footage and stopped when he saw something horrifying, Mark's face, twisted in fear, staring directly into the camera. Behind him, dozens of shadowy hands reached out, pulling him deeper into the mist. His mouth moved, forming one final word before the screen cut to black. "Run." Jason tried to ignore it. He told himself it was a glitch, a trick of the mind. But the whispers followed him. At night, his phone would buzz with static calls from an unknown number. He started seeing fog creeping under his apartment door, no matter the weather outside. Then one evening, his reflection in the mirror shifted. It wasn't his face staring back. It was Mark's. That was the breaking point. Jason grabbed his keys, called Emily, and told her they had to go back. They had to end this. They returned to Eileen under a heavy sky. The town looked the same, but something felt wrong. The air was too still, the streets too empty. They made their way to the abandoned mill, where it all began. The fog was waiting. Jason held up the camera. The red recording light blinked. If we don't come back, someone has to know the truth. They stepped into the mist. The whispers returned, growing louder with each step. Then Jason saw it, Mark, standing at the entrance of the mill. His clothes were tattered, his skin pale as the fog itself. Jason, Mark's voice was hoarse. You shouldn't have come back. Emily grabbed Jason's arm, terror in her eyes. That's not him. Mark, or whatever had become of him, tilted his head. His lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. You can't leave. The fog surged forward. Hands reached out from the mist. The last thing the camera captured was a scream, then silence. A week later, the Eileen Police Department received a call about an abandoned car near the old mill. Inside, they found a camera. The footage was corrupted. The only thing that remained was the final frame, Jason and Emily, standing in the fog. Their eyes were hollow. And they were whispering. Eileen, New York, had a way of swallowing those who dug too deep. First, it took Mark. Then, Jason and Emily. But the town didn't forget. The whispers remained. A month after their disappearance, Detective Alan Graves arrived in Eileen. He had been assigned to missing persons cases for over a decade, but something about this one felt different. The last known location of Jason and Emily was the abandoned textile mill. Their car had been found outside, doors unlocked, camera on the passenger seat. The screen flickered with static, but one frame remained clear, Jason and Emily, standing in the fog, their eyes dark and hollow. Alan had seen many things in his years, but this sent a chill down his spine. The mill stood at the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown grass and rusted fences. Alan pushed through the entrance, flashlight in hand. The air was thick with dust, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and old machinery. But the worst part? The fog was already inside. His radio crackled. Help me. Alan froze. The voice was distant but familiar. He had listened to hours of footage from Jason's recovered camera. He knew that voice. It was Mark. Alan pressed forward, ignoring every instinct telling him to turn back. His flashlight flickered. The temperature dropped. Then, the whispers grew louder. A shadow moved in the mist. Jason. Emily. Alan called, gripping his gun. Silence. Then, figures emerged, Jason, Emily, and Mark. Their skin was pale, their movements slow, their eyes dark as empty voids. Their mouths open, but instead of voices, there was only a low, guttural hiss. Alan stepped back, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. What happened to you? Jason's lips curled into something resembling a grin. We listened. Alan felt the cold breath of something behind him. He turned, too late. The fog rushed forward, swallowing everything. Eileen, New York, remains quiet. No new investigations. No further reports. But every October, the fog returns. And if you stand near the old mill at night, you might hear them, whispering, calling, waiting. For the next one. Eileen, New York, had its fair share of ghost stories, but none were as feared as the tale of the Hollow Man. People whispered about him in hushed tones, saying he was once a man who had lost everything, his family, his home, even his face. They claimed he wandered the streets at night, searching for someone to take his place. If you saw him, you had only one chance to escape: don't let him see your reflection. It started with Eric Calloway, a local high school teacher. He had stayed late grading papers when he noticed something odd in the reflection of his classroom window, a dark figure standing behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Shaking it off, he packed his things and left. The school hallways were empty, the janitor long gone. As he walked past the trophy case near the exit, his breath caught in his throat. The reflection was still there. A tall, shadowy figure stood where Eric should have been. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless void. Its hands twitched at its sides, fingers stretching unnaturally long. Eric stumbled backward. He didn't turn around, he knew the rules. Don't let it see your reflection. Heart pounding, he took slow steps toward the exit, keeping his eyes locked on the trophy case. The hollow man stood perfectly still. Then, as Eric reached for the door, it tilted its head. The lights flickered. The reflection lunged forward. And Eric Calloway was never seen again. Detective Mara Jensen had seen strange cases before, but this one was different. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Just a single handprint on the glass of the trophy case, an impossibly long, thin handprint. Mara searched through town records, looking for any similar cases. That's when she found them. 10 disappearances over the past 50 years. Every single victim vanished near a reflective surface. The oldest report dated back to 1903, when a man named William Halloway, a local glassmaker, was found dead inside his workshop. His face had been completely erased, leaving only smooth, featureless skin. A note was found beside him. It read, "I see him now. In the glass. Waiting." Mara didn't believe in ghost stories, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That night, she covered every mirror in her house. She turned off her phone screen before bed. At 3:07 a.m., she woke up gasping. Something cold was breathing against her neck. Her bedroom window faced the dark street below. In the glass, she saw the reflection of her room. The bed. The dresser. And the hollow man, standing right behind her. Mara squeezed her eyes shut. Don't let him see your reflection. But then, a whisper. "I see you now." The lights flickered. The window shattered. And in the morning, Detective Mara Jensen was gone. All that remained was a smudged handprint on the glass. Island, New York, woke up to another disappearance. Detective Mara Jensen was gone, just like the others. No forced entry. No struggle. Only a single handprint on the shattered glass of her bedroom window. The town whispered about the legend of the hollow man. Some said he took those who stared too long into reflections. Others believed he was trapped in the glass itself, searching for a way out. Only one person knew the truth: Lucas Grayson had lived in Alien his whole life. He was the only person to have ever survived an encounter with the hollow man. At least, that's what he claimed. "I saw him when I was 10, Lucas told Sheriff Caldwell. His voice was rough, his hands shaking. He doesn't just take you, he pulls you into the glass. A prison of reflections." The sheriff scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" Lucas pulled out an old pocket mirror and held it up. I never looked directly into mirrors anymore. Not since that night. The sheriff saw the fear in Lucas' eyes. He wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, but then, why was the town losing people? Desperate for answers, the sheriff set up an experiment. He placed cameras around Mara's bedroom and positioned a large mirror in the center of the room. Then, he and his deputy, Ethan Wells, sat in the dark, watching the monitors. At 3:07 a.m., the temperature dropped. Static buzzed through the speakers. Then, movement. A shadow appeared in the mirror. Tall. Featureless. Its head twitched unnaturally as if sensing something. The sheriff and Ethan held their breath. Then, Ethan made a mistake. He turned. For just a second, he looked at the mirror directly instead of through the camera. The shadow in the reflection turned its head. The screen flickered. The mirror cracked. Ethan screamed. The sheriff spun around, just in time to see Ethan being pulled into the glass. His reflection struggled, his hands clawing at the surface, but there was no sound. Just silence. Then, he was gone. The mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sheriff ran. He didn't stop until he reached Lucas' house, pounding on the door. "You were right," he gasped. "He's real." Lucas exhaled slowly. "Then it's too late." The sheriff looked at him. "What do you mean?" Lucas hesitated, then pointed at the glass shards on the floor. The sheriff looked down. The reflections weren't right. They weren't moving with him. They were staring at him. Their mouths opened in unison. "Help us." And then, the lights flickered. Sheriff Caldwell stared at the glass shards on Lucas' floor. The reflections weren't mimicking his movements anymore. They were staring. "Help us." The sheriff's pulse pounded in his ears. He took a step back, his breath shaky. "What the hell is this?" Lucas didn't answer. He was already grabbing a hammer from his kitchen drawer. "Whatever you do," Lucas whispered, "don't let them pull you in." And then he swung. The hammer crashed down on the largest shard, shattering it into smaller fragments. The reflections inside screamed, a soundless, gut-wrenching wail that rattled the sheriff's skull. The room seemed to bend. The light flickered. Then, silence. Lucas breathed heavily. That won't stop him. But it might slow him down. The sheriff turned to him, his hands trembling. "What the hell is happening?" Lucas locked eyes with him. "The hollow man isn't a ghost." His voice was low, haunted. "He's a prisoner. And every time he takes someone, his prison grows." Sheriff Caldwell felt ice crawl up his spine. "Then where is he now?" Lucas hesitated. Then, the overhead light flickered. And the answer became clear. "The station," the sheriff whispered. "The holding cells have mirrors." Lucas nodded grimly. "That's where he'll be." The two men grabbed black spray paint and headed for the Alien police station. As they entered, the sheriff felt it immediately, the cold. The air inside the station was frigid. The lights buzzed, dimmer than usual. The station was empty, but something felt wrong. They moved cautiously toward the holding cells. Then, a whisper. "I see you now." Lucas froze. "He's here." The sheriff lifted his flashlight and shone it at the one-way mirror in the interrogation room. The hollow man stood on the other side of the glass. Tall. Faceless. His long fingers pressed against the surface, waiting. The sheriff swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Lucas handed him the spray can. "We seal him in." The sheriff and Lucas worked quickly, painting over every reflective surface. The hollow man twitched inside the glass, his head tilting as if confused. Then, his body lurched. His hands clawed at the glass, his form growing more frantic. The station lights flickered violently. The sheriff's breath caught as cracks spread across the mirror. He and Lucas stepped back as the mirror exploded outward. And the hollow man stepped through, the lights went out. The air turned ice cold. The sheriff felt fingers brush his arm, long, stretching fingers. He swung wildly, but his hand met nothing but air. Lucas yelled, "Don't look at him." Then, glass shattered everywhere. When the sheriff opened his eyes, he was alone. Lucas was gone. The hollow man was gone. And every mirror in the station was now just an empty frame. Alien, New York, was quiet again. The disappearances had stopped. Sheriff Caldwell never spoke about that night. He never looked into mirrors. But sometimes, late at night, he'd catch something strange in the corner of his vision. His reflection wasn't always his own. And the whisper always followed. "I see you now." Sheriff Caldwell left Alien the following month. He told himself it was just another case, another strange event he couldn't explain. But deep down, he knew better. The hollow man was still out there. And so was Lucas. A year passed without incident. Then, one night, a police dispatch recording resurfaced. The call had been made from an abandoned house just outside of Alien. The voice on the recording: Lucas Grayson. "He's not alone anymore." Lucas' voice was hoarse, strained. "They're coming through the mirrors, it's not just him anymore." Static. Then, something inhuman whispered through the speaker. "We see you now." The line went dead. Sheriff Caldwell had sworn he'd never return. But when he heard the recording, he knew he had no choice. When he arrived, Alien felt wrong. The streets were too quiet. Windows were covered with newspapers, curtains drawn tight. People refused to look at their reflections, moving hurriedly past storefronts and car mirrors. The town knew something had changed. Lucas' last known location was the Halloway glass factory, long abandoned. It was the same factory where William Halloway had died in 1903, the first man to see the hollow man. Caldwell pushed inside. Broken glass crunched underfoot. The building smelled of dust, decay, and something else. Something cold. Then he saw them. Mirrors lined the walls, hundreds of them. And inside them, they were waiting. The hollow man was no longer alone. Dozens of faceless figures stood in the mirrors, motionless, their empty heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their hands pressed against the glass. Caldwell's breath caught in his throat. Then, one of them stepped forward. Not out of the mirror. Into his reflection. Caldwell felt a wave of nausea as his body refused to move, but his reflection took a step forward without him. He tried to back away. His reflection smiled. Then, it lunged. Caldwell barely threw himself to the side as the glass shattered outward. A hand shot out from the shards, fingers stretching unnaturally long. A voice whispered through the air. "Come with us." Caldwell grabbed his service revolver and fired. The bullet shattered another mirror, sending shards flying, but the figures didn't stop. They were crawling out now. He ran. The figures whispered his name as he sprinted toward the exit, their voices overlapping in a low, inhuman hum. "We see you now." Caldwell reached his car, slammed the door shut, and refused to look into the rearview mirror. He floored the gas pedal and never looked back. By morning, Alien was gone. No fires. No destruction. No signs of struggle. Just emptiness. The entire town had vanished. Storefronts remained intact. Cars sat abandoned. Food still rested on dinner tables. But not a single person remained. All that was left were the mirrors. And inside them, the town still stood. The people were still there. Trapped. Waiting. For the next visitor to look too closely. For the next reflection to take.